Hey guys, as you can tell, today my setup is a little different. So I actually got like this amateur ring lights for my channel. I know it's not like a huge change, but it's still like some change. And I'm hoping that this can actually increase the quality of my videos in the future. And so I hope that you enjoy this background change and let me know what you think in the comments below. Also, I have made an intro video for my Patreon account. You can check it out in the link below as well. It gives you like all the information on the exclusive content, voting power, Patreon shoutout, and all the other benefits that you can find in my account. Alright, on to today's topic. So today's topic is about my views on the differences between the introverted feeling function and extroverted feeling function. So something about this is very interesting to me because I am an INFJ, so it means that I use extroverted feeling as my second function, but I also happen to have a lot of FI user friends. So a lot of my friends are ISFPs and NTJs. I do have a lot of INTJ friends, so I'm very aware of how like FI users work. And so today I want to explain to you some of the differences that I see in like the communication style of the FI and FE users, as well as like the way they perceive the world, like how it's different, so that you can kind of help you to minimize misunderstandings that can arise in the situations, in your interactions, and so on. So the first one that I want to talk about, it can seem pretty obvious, but this is something that a lot of people may not even know in detail about. It's about the facial expression. So FI users and FE users actually have quite a bit of difference in the way that they express themselves. Like FE users typically tend to be a lot more expressive with their emotions on their face, whereas FI users tend to be a lot more subtle. And this is obviously not saying that all FI users do not ever use like facial expressions, or all FE users have to use facial expressions at all times. So that can, lead to confusion. Like if you overly rely on this stereotype, you can actually mistype a lot of people, because even for an FE user like myself, if I'm with strangers, it's unlikely that I would be super responsive with my facial expressions. It's unlikely that I would show them like this very huge smile on my face and react to every joke that they say, because I'm simply not close to them. And this is true for many introverts. A lot of introverts tend to look aloof from the beginning when they don't really know someone that well, especially for people they don't really vibe with, or just not know enough to show like their more fun and animated side. So that doesn't mean that all introverts automatically become FI users when they don't use facial expressions in that way. However, the difference is that once you are close to someone, once you are their friends, you are better likely to see the difference between FI and FE users, because for FI users, even among their friends, they don't use as much facial expression when they are talking about something. They do use facial expression, but compared to FE users, it's not nearly as animated, it's not nearly as expressive. So, some of the famous FI users that you can see from TV, I mean, obviously a very, very obvious one is Kristen Stewart. A lot of people say they can't really see her expressions. I actually am thinking she might be a TJ type, but I'm not very close to following her or anything, so I would reserve my judgment, but definitely she's an FI user, and she's a very good example of how, someone with very high FI and very low or no FE would kind of show up. And another case in point is my INTJ friends. INTJs typically have the lowest FE because FE is kind of like their blind spot. I mean, if you look at socionics, FE is their polar function, meaning that they don't really use it at all, and they are actually kind of like threatened by the use of it, especially if they're not familiar with it. So typically INTJs do not really have any facial expressions, and they can smile, they can be friendly towards their friends, but again, it's not like super animated. It's not like very, very obvious change of facial expressions, and you can kind of tell. Whereas compared to high FE users, if you look at ENFJs, ESFJs, they tend to have like this very sunshiny smile like this. Like they smile very, very often, and almost like you never see a time where they're not smiling. I mean, this is not to say every single one of them is like that, but I do tend to see this tendency, especially in ESFJs. I don't know why, they seem to be perpetually smiling. And I think it's because of the very high use of FE. Okay, the second difference in the FE and FI users is their communication style, and this can apply to online communication as well. So what I noticed is that FE users tend to use a lot more emojis relatively to FI users. Again, not saying that all FI users don't use emojis, but they definitely use it in a lot less than FE users. They don't tend to react in an excessive way, the way that high FE users do. So I actually have some of my ENFJ friends who do very frequent heart reacts to my messages. Whereas, when it comes to like my ISFP friends, they would be more selective in what they want to react to, and they are also like a little more subtle in terms of the emoji usage. They may use certain emojis that they think are funny or fun to use, but they don't tend to use it as frequently as some of the FE users. And I tend to notice that, I don't know if it's an FI thing, this is just, my own observation. I realize that FI users like to use more subtle looking emojis. So what I tend to see is that they sometimes use the shy looking emoji, or they use like the moon face. My INTJ friend loves the moon face and the shy one. And they don't tend to use like those really sunshiny, huge laughs, huge smiles. Those tend to be more frequently observed in FE user friends. So let me know if that is something that you have observed as well. Again, this is just like something that I noticed. It's not like, oh, you have to use certain emojis because you are an FI user and so on. Okay, now we go to the third difference. The third difference is in the way that they maintain their friendships. So what I notice is that FE users tend to be a lot more reliant on very overt expressions of support. And I mean, this may not even be just among friends. This can also be like towards acquaintances or towards even people they barely know, because FE users like to show very obvious signs of support, and this can even be towards like strangers on the internet. For example, if they support the videos, they may give love back and so on. Whereas FI users, they also can do that, but I think that in general they're a little more selective towards like who they show this emotional support and love. So typically FI users tend to show a lot more of these emotions among their close friends, and they don't tend to use hearts reacts towards people who are their acquaintances or otherwise like people they don't know that well, because they are just more subtle about it. And FI users tend to be a lot more selective. So typically if they show a certain emotion towards you, it has to be something that they really feel for you. Whereas for FE users, sometimes they can use certain emojis or certain like expressions of support just as a general expression of support to the community. Whereas FI users, they have to like actually know you, they have to actually care about you individually before they can send such messages, if that makes sense. And also FI users and FE users, they show care and concern in friendships a little differently. FE users tend to be a lot more overt, once again, in the way that they show their affection towards their friends. And I also noticed that they tend to be a little more consistent, whereas FI users, they tend to do it on their own terms. So sometimes that can lead to miscommunication where an FE user thinks that the FI user doesn't care about them or doesn't really care about the friendship, when the FI user may just be having a tough time or can just be too busy to be maintaining like active communication. And especially for INTJs who generally they don't use FE, they can literally disappear for like months and suddenly come back again and talk normally like nothing happened. And it's not really because they hated you for that 1 month. Honestly, it's because most likely of their busy schedule, INTJs do not tend to like value that kind of consistent need for display affection and communication and friendship. It's more like to them, it's like, oh, I understand it deep down that I care about you, and you understand it that you care about me, so we don't have to say it out loud. This is something that my INTJ friend told me about her friendship, actually. And the funny thing is that she has a very close ISTJ friend, and two of them both understand that completely, because for the ISTJ, they also do not really use FE. So to them, it's more like a telepathic kind of friendship where they both understand how much they mean to each other, and they will show through actions, but not really through like constant communication or displays of affection. So this is a very huge difference between FI and FE friendships. Again, it doesn't mean that all FI users have to necessarily drop off the face of the earth. Obviously, not everyone is like the INTJ. Some FI users still require like some affectionate displays, but it also tends to be more subtle and not as frequent. But whenever it does come by, it kind of feels very precious, because it's like you know that they really do mean it at that moment, and it's not like a habitual thing for them. Whereas for every user, it's more like a habitual thing for them to be showing support. Okay, so the last point is about perception. Perception is really quite different when it comes to how FI users and FE users view the world. And I know that this has been touched on in other videos as well, but I would like to, use specific examples to illustrate this point. So FI users definitely tend to be a lot more self-centered in the way that they view the world. And I don't mean that in a bad way necessarily. It's like they just focus on themselves. Literally, that's what it means. So to them, their focus is really on their own values and their own beliefs and their own preferences. They do not tend to focus on values, beliefs of the group. Whereas FE users, we can also focus on our own beliefs and our own values. It doesn't mean that we have to sacrifice our own values, but it does mean that we are more aware of like general values and general like what is actually going on in society in terms of what other people value. So we are a lot more like aware, and we almost like place more importance as well on understanding the other people's beliefs and preferences and how they feel and so on. So FE users, obviously an unhealthy FE user can really absorb or kind of adopt the values of a group, but it doesn't have to be for all FE users, because FE users also have TI, which is a more independent function. Not really the topic of this video, but just in case you want to know about that, you can check out my video on the function TI. But FI users, generally speaking, they do focus on their own beliefs to the point where sometimes they can be a little confused over like what other people are thinking or what other people are believing. So one example that I can illustrate this point is, if someone who is an FI user has certain preferences for people that are different from the norm, they almost like cannot see why other people are believing certain things. So they would kind of assume that either that everyone else thinks like them, or that they just almost neglect what other people are thinking and focus on what they themselves are thinking. So I would give you this example. So I do have a friend who, generally she has quite a specific preference for guys, and she tends to, prefer a certain look of guys that is not necessarily the look that everyone prefers. And when I'm talking to her about, other people's preferences, she kind of got confused. It's almost like she doesn't really get why other people prefer a certain other type of guy. Because to her, it's like, this is the ideal type, this should be something that everyone cares about. This should be something that everyone finds attractive. But when I try to explain to her, it's like, when it comes to society level, people do have these other preferences, and a lot of these preferences are like really, really different from hers. And she tends to kind of see the world through her own lens, like through her own beliefs, filtered by her own preferences, whereas I see the world as, okay, I can tell what your preferences and all your values are and what generally society likes, but then I also have my own preference. Yeah, sometimes that can be a little confusing, especially for FI users who may not be as familiar with the use of FE. So again, it differs from person to person, because some FI users may be more familiar with the use of FE and they can kind of get it even if they don't use it. Whereas other FI users, they may not really have any knowledge about FE, and that can cause them to maybe not take into consideration like other people's needs. And a lot of times it's unintentional. It's not like they intentionally don't want to take into consideration. It's just that it's their blind spot. They don't really think about that like as much as FE users. And when it comes to this, again, I feel like a balance is necessary sometimes. Like FE users, yes, they do care about other people's feelings, and they are a lot more aware of what other people think, but they really shouldn't make that the center of their lives either, because that's unhealthy to like be overly concerned about other people's feelings and absorb them, and and all that, like lose yourself in the process. And then FI is on the other extreme, where they can sometimes totally disregard or be unaware of what other people are feeling or thinking, and that can also be hurtful even if unintentionally. So really it's about balancing. I think it's good for FE and FI users to communicate and to really try to see things, in other ways. I don't know. I feel like I actually really appreciate FI users because they teach me a lot about things that I myself am maybe not that good at, and they teach me to like value my own preferences and beliefs, and hopefully I allow them to see some other preferences beyond their own and to understand them. So I just wanted to say that I am actually setting a target for my own channel. I'm hoping to reach 1K subscribers eventually. So if you can help me out in this quest, just help me to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Also, share it if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!